A waitress warned the CEO, "Don't sign that deal, your partner is betraying you." But when he rushed to his office, he froze at what his secretary was doing. Ethan Calloway, the charismatic and calculating CEO of Calloway Enterprises, had a habit of dining alone at the Velvet Spoon, an upscale diner tucked away in the heart of the city. It was his sanctuary, a place to escape the relentless pressure of his position while indulging in his favorite dishes. Tonight, however, was different. Across the table sat Victor Harlow, his longtime business partner and one of the few people Ethan trusted implicitly. The two men were deep in discussion about the impending merger with Zenith Technologies, a deal poised to elevate Calloway Enterprises to unprecedented heights. "This is it, Ethan," Victor said, swirling his glass of red wine. "Once the ink dries, we'll dominate the market. No one will be able to touch us." Ethan nodded, his sharp features betraying no emotion. "It's a big leap, but it feels right. The numbers check out, and Zenith's reach complements our infrastructure perfectly." Victor leaned back, a confident smirk playing on his lips. "You've got nothing to worry about. By this time next week, we'll be legends." As Victor excused himself to take a call, Ethan found himself gazing out the window, letting the quiet hum of the diner wash over him. That's when she appeared. "Mr. Calloway?" The voice was soft yet firm, and when Ethan turned, he found himself looking into the eyes of the waitress who had been serving their table. She was petite, with dark, searching eyes that seemed to pierce through his guarded exterior. "Yes?" Ethan replied, his tone polite but wary. She glanced over her shoulder, ensuring Victor was still out of earshot, then leaned closer. "Don't sign that deal. Your partner is betraying you." The words hung in the air like a storm cloud. Ethan's brow furrowed, a mix of confusion and disbelief crossing his face. "What did you just say?" "You heard me," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know it sounds crazy, but Victor isn't who you think he is. That deal, it's a trap." Ethan's first instinct was to dismiss her. This was absurd. A waitress, someone who didn't know him or his business, warning him about the most important decision of his career? It sounded like a bad plot from one of those conspiracy thrillers his assistant Claire loved to watch. "Who are you?" he demanded, his voice low but firm. "Samantha," she said simply. Her eyes flicked toward the entrance as if she expected someone to burst in and drag her away. "I can't say more right now, but you need to look deeper. Don't trust him. Please." Ethan was about to press her further when Victor returned, his booming laugh cutting through the tension. Samantha straightened abruptly, her professional demeanor snapping back into place. "Everything all right?" Victor asked, his eyes darting between Ethan and Samantha. "Just fine," Ethan replied coolly, watching as Samantha hurried away, her head low. For the rest of the evening, Ethan couldn't shake the unease Samantha's words had planted. Every confident statement Victor made, every reassured smile he offered, felt slightly off now, as if hiding something beneath the surface. When the check arrived, Ethan scanned the room, searching for Samantha, but she was nowhere to be seen. Had she left? Or had she been forced to leave? By the time he stepped out of the diner and into the crisp night air, Ethan's thoughts were a whirlwind. On the drive home, he replayed the encounter in his mind, trying to decipher the meaning behind Samantha's cryptic warning. He wanted to believe it was nonsense. He needed to believe it was nonsense. But something about the way she had looked at him, so earnest, so desperate, gnawed at the edges of his usually unshakable confidence. As he pulled into his penthouse driveway, he resolved to investigate. It was probably nothing, just a misunderstanding. But Ethan Calloway hadn't built an empire by ignoring warning signs. What he didn't know was that this small crack in his certainty was about to shatter everything he thought he knew. Ethan stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse, the city lights sprawling beneath him like a constellation of possibilities. His usually calm mind was a storm of thoughts, all centered around Samantha's cryptic warning. "Don't sign that deal. Your partner is betraying you." Victor had been with him from the start, back when Callaway Enterprises was little more than a dream scribbled on the back of a napkin. He'd been a friend, a confidant, and a business partner. Trusting Victor was second nature. Yet the urgency in Samantha's voice kept replaying in his mind like a stubborn echo. Ethan poured himself a drink, the amber liquid swirling in the glass as he tried to make sense of the situation. Who was Samantha? How could a waitress possibly know anything about the deal? And why had she risked so much to warn him? The questions gnawed at him, but the logical side of his brain pushed back. This was likely a misunderstanding, a coincidence. Maybe she'd overheard something and misinterpreted it. Still, his instincts, honed by years of navigating the cutthroat world of business, told him not to dismiss the warning outright. The following morning, Ethan arrived at the office earlier than usual, his mind set on putting his unease to rest. He entered the sleek, modern headquarters of Callaway Enterprises, greeted by the hum of activity and the polite smiles of his staff. As he settled into his chair, his secretary, Claire, entered with her usual efficiency, balancing a tray of coffee and a stack of documents. "Morning, Mr. Callaway. Your agenda for today." "Thanks, Claire," Ethan said, taking the coffee but barely glancing at the papers. His mind was elsewhere. "Everything okay?" Claire asked, her brow furrowing slightly. She had worked with Ethan long enough to notice when something was off. "I'm fine," he replied, brushing off her concern. "Just a lot on my mind." But Claire wasn't convinced. She lingered for a moment longer before nodding and leaving the room. Determined to get answers, Ethan retrieved the merger documents from his safe. Spread out on his desk were contracts, financial statements, and projections, each carefully vetted by his legal team. On the surface, everything looked flawless. But Samantha's warning lingered in the back of his mind, a shadow he couldn't shake. As he flipped through the pages, he noticed a small discrepancy, a seemingly insignificant detail in the profit-sharing agreement. Victor's name was mentioned in connection with a subsidiary Ethan didn't recognize. It was buried in legal jargon, easy to miss, but something about it felt wrong. The thought gnawed at him until his phone buzzed. A text message lit up the screen. "Don't let greed blind you. Check the details of the merger. S." Ethan froze, staring at the message. How had Samantha gotten his number? The fact that she had not only reached out but also mentioned the deal again added an unnerving layer to the situation. By mid-afternoon, Ethan's skepticism had morphed into suspicion. He decided to dig deeper, starting with the subsidiary mentioned in the documents. After an hour of searching, he uncovered a connection between the subsidiary and an offshore account. The account wasn't linked to the company. It was linked to Victor. Ethan leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. Why would Victor set up an offshore account tied to the merger? Was it for tax reasons, or was it something far more insidious? As the pieces started to come together, Ethan felt the weight of Samantha's warning more acutely. She hadn't just been guessing. She knew something. That evening, Ethan returned to the Velvet Spoon, hoping to find Samantha and confront her. But when he asked the hostess about her, the woman gave him a puzzled look. "She didn't come in today," the hostess said. "Did she call in sick?" Ethan pressed. The woman shook her head. "No, but it's not unusual. Samantha keeps to herself. She's like a ghost. Sometimes she's here, sometimes she's not." Ethan left the diner with more questions than answers. Samantha's sudden absence felt too convenient to be a coincidence. Was she avoiding him, or had something happened to her? Back in his penthouse, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that he was being drawn into a web of secrets and lies, one that extended far beyond the walls of his company. The merger was supposed to be the crowning achievement of his career, a step into a brighter future. But now it felt like the first step into a trap. Who could he trust? And who was pulling the strings behind the scenes? As Ethan drifted into a restless sleep, one thing was clear. Samantha's warning had turned his world upside down, and the deeper he looked, the darker the truth seemed to become. The hum of Ethan's car engine filled the silence as he drove to his office early the next morning. His mind replayed the events of the past 2 days, from Samantha's cryptic warning to the troubling offshore account he had uncovered. Each piece of the puzzle seemed disjointed, yet it all pointed toward one undeniable truth. Something was wrong, and Victor might not be the ally he had always believed him to be. By the time he stepped out of the elevator into the sleek, glass-walled offices of Callaway Enterprises, the usual sense of control he carried felt precariously thin. As he walked toward his office, his employees greeted him with polite smiles and nods, oblivious to the turmoil brewing beneath his calm exterior. He was halfway through reviewing the merger contracts again when his assistant, Claire, knocked on his door. "Mr. Callaway, there's someone here to see you," Claire said, her tone cautious. Ethan frowned. "I don't have any meetings scheduled this early. Who is it?" "She didn't give her full name," Claire replied. "Just said her name is Samantha." Ethan's heart skipped a beat. He hadn't expected her to show up so soon, or at all. "Send her in." Moments later, Samantha stepped into his office. Gone was the uniform from the diner, replaced by a simple but professional outfit, a fitted blazer, dark jeans, and flats. Her eyes, however, still carried the same intensity from their last meeting. "Mr. Callaway," she began, her voice steady but low, as though she didn't want anyone overhearing. "I'm sorry to show up like this, but I had no choice. Things are worse than you think." Ethan gestured toward a chair, motioning for her to sit. "You've got my attention. Start talking." Samantha hesitated, glancing toward the office door as if to ensure no one was listening. "You need to know who you're dealing with," she said, leaning forward. "Victor isn't just betraying you on this deal. He's been setting you up for months. I've seen it before. He uses these mergers to strip companies of assets, then funnels the money into offshore accounts before walking away." Ethan crossed his arms, his skepticism still evident despite the mounting evidence. "And how exactly do you know all this? You're a waitress. What's your connection to Victor?" Samantha's gaze flickered with something unspoken, guilt, perhaps, before she answered. "I wasn't always a waitress," she admitted. "I used to work in corporate fraud investigations. Victor's name came up in a case I was working on 2 years ago. I couldn't prove anything at the time, but I've been watching him ever since. When I saw him with you at the diner, I knew I had to warn you." Ethan raised an eyebrow, skeptical but intrigued. "And what's in it for you?" "Nothing," she said firmly. "If anything, I'm putting myself at risk by coming to you. But I've seen what Victor does to people, good people who trusted him, and I can't stand by and let him ruin someone else." Ethan leaned back in his chair, her words sinking in. "You said things are worse than I think. What do you mean?" Samantha pulled a small folder from her bag and slid it across the desk. Inside were documents, printouts, and screenshots, all pointing to a trail of fraud connected to the offshore account Ethan had discovered. "He's already started transferring money," Samantha explained. "Small amounts, so it doesn't raise red flags, but it's enough to show he's moving assets out of your reach. Once the merger is finalized, he'll take what's left and disappear." Ethan's jaw tightened as he stared at the evidence. It was damning, and yet a part of him still resisted the idea that Victor, his partner, his friend, could be capable of this level of betrayal. Before Ethan could respond, there was a knock at the door. Claire peeked her head in, her expression neutral but her eyes curious. "Everything all right, Mr. Callaway?" Ethan glanced at Samantha, who gave a subtle shake of her head. "Yes, Claire. Just going over some documents," Ethan replied smoothly. Claire nodded but lingered for a moment longer before closing the door. Samantha exhaled, tension visibly leaving her shoulders. "You can't trust anyone right now, Ethan. Not until you know who's really on your side." Ethan stared at her, conflicted. The woman sitting in front of him was a stranger, yet she had risked a great deal to bring him this information. Meanwhile, the man he had trusted for years was suddenly under suspicion. "All right," he said finally. "Let's say I believe you. What's the next step?" Samantha smiled faintly, relief flickering across her face. "You need more proof." enough to confront Victor and protect yourself if he tries to retaliate. But you also need to act fast. He's not going to wait around once he realizes you're onto him. Ethan nodded, his mind already racing ahead to what needed to be done. And what about you? Why should I trust you? Her smile faded. You don't have to trust me, she said quietly. But if you don't act, you're going to lose everything. As Samantha left his office, Ethan felt the weight of her words settle on him. Trust wasn't something he gave easily, but for the first time in his career, he was realizing how fragile it could be. He looked down at the folder on his desk, the evidence Samantha had given him. It was a start, but if Victor was as clever as she claimed, it wasn't nearly enough. Time was running out and the stakes couldn't be higher. Ethan spent the night combing through the documents Samantha had given him. Every page confirmed what he dreaded. Victor wasn't just involved in shady practices. He was orchestrating a betrayal that could bring Callaway Enterprises to its knees. The evidence was detailed but incomplete. Ethan needed to dig deeper, and for that, he had to keep his suspicions hidden, especially from Victor. The next morning, Ethan arrived at the office even earlier than usual, hoping for some uninterrupted time to continue his investigation. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting a golden glow through the floor-to-ceiling windows. The building was nearly empty, with only a few early risers scattered across the floors. As he approached his office, he noticed something odd. The door was slightly ajar. Ethan froze, his instincts kicking in. He pushed the door open quietly, his gaze sweeping across the room. There, seated at his desk, was Claire. Her back was turned to him, and she was hunched over a stack of documents spread across the desk. What caught his attention wasn't just her presence, it was her movements. She was frantically flipping through the papers, scanning them as if looking for something specific. Ethan stepped inside, his voice calm but firm. "Claire, what are you doing?" She jolted upright, the color draining from her face. "Mr. Callaway, I didn't hear you come in." She fumbled to gather the papers, trying to shuffle them into a neat stack, but her hands were trembling. "I asked you a question," Ethan said, his tone sharper now. "Why are you going through my desk?" Claire hesitated, her eyes darting toward the drawer where she had just slipped something. "I was organizing the documents for the merger," she stammered. "I thought it might help you prepare for the meeting with Victor later today." Ethan crossed his arms, his piercing gaze locked on her. "Don't lie to me, Claire. What were you really doing?" For a moment she said nothing, her face a mask of panic. Then, with a resigned sigh, she reached into the drawer and pulled out a slim manila folder. "I found this yesterday," she admitted. "It was in a stack of papers Victor gave me to file. I didn't want to say anything until I was sure, but I think there's something you need to see." Ethan took the folder, flipping it open. Inside were financial statements, transfer records, and legal documents, all pointing to a shell company under Victor's name, the same company Samantha had flagged in her warning. "These transfers," Claire explained, her voice quieter now, "they don't add up. I think he's moving money out of the company. I wanted to confirm it before telling you, but I didn't expect you to walk in on me." Ethan studied the documents, his expression unreadable. Claire had always been loyal, a cornerstone of his team. But now, doubt began to creep in. Why hadn't she come to him sooner? "You've known about this since yesterday?" he asked, his voice steady, but edged with suspicion. Claire nodded. "I wasn't sure what it meant at first. I thought maybe it was part of the merger, but then I remembered Samantha's warning." Ethan's eyes narrowed. "You know about Samantha?" Claire hesitated, her gaze dropping to the floor. "I overheard her name when she came to see you. I put the pieces together. I was only trying to protect you, Ethan." Ethan leaned back against the edge of his desk, the folder still in his hands. The evidence Claire had uncovered aligned perfectly with Samantha's claims, but her hesitance to share it immediately left a bitter taste in his mouth. "Never. Why didn't you come to me as soon as you found this?" he asked. Claire looked up, her eyes pleading. "Because I wasn't sure who I could trust," she admitted. This deal is huge, and I know how much you've put into it. I didn't want to bring you bad news without being certain." Her words rang true, but Ethan's instincts told him there was more to the story. "From now on, you come to me the moment you find something. Understood?" "Yes, Mr. Calloway," Claire said, her voice barely above a whisper. As soon as Claire left the room, Ethan locked the folder in his desk drawer and pulled out his phone. He needed to speak to Samantha. She had been right about Victor, and now he needed her insight more than ever. The phone rang twice before Samantha picked up. "Ethan?" she said, her voice cautious. "You were right," he said without preamble. "Victor is moving money into a shell company. I have the proof." There was a pause. Then Samantha's voice came through, steadier now. "Good. That's the first step. But if he knows you're on to him, he'll accelerate his plans. You need to act fast." "I need more than just these documents," Ethan said. "If I'm going to stop Victor, I need undeniable proof, something that ties him directly to the fraud." Samantha hesitated. "There might be a way," she said finally, "but it's risky." Ethan's jaw tightened. "I'm listening." "There's an account he's been using to funnel the money," Samantha explained. "If we can trace it back to him, it'll be game over. But to do that, you'll need access to his private correspondence." Ethan nodded, already formulating a plan. "Leave that to me." As he ended the call, Ethan glanced at the locked drawer where the incriminating documents were stored. The walls were closing in, but he wasn't going to back down. Victor's betrayal had shaken him, but the realization that even those closest to him, like Claire, might be hiding secrets left him feeling more isolated than ever. This wasn't just a battle for his company. It was a test of loyalty, trust, and survival. Ethan knew he had to tread carefully, for one wrong move could cost him everything. Ethan sat in his office, surrounded by the chaos of documents, files, and evidence, when Claire knocked softly on the door. Before he could respond, she stepped in with an uncharacteristic unease. "There's someone here to see you again," Claire said, her voice lower than usual. "Samantha?" Ethan guessed. Claire nodded. "Yes, but you might want to handle this carefully." Ethan frowned but gestured for Claire to send her in. Moments later, Samantha entered, her expression tense but determined. Ethan noticed the same intensity in her eyes, but today, something else flickered there. Hesitation. "Thank you for coming," Ethan said, standing up. "We've got more to talk about." But before he could finish, Claire, who had stayed by the door, let out a small gasp. "You," Claire said, her voice sharp with recognition. Samantha froze, her eyes narrowing as she locked gazes with Claire. "Claire?" The tension in the room thickened as Ethan glanced between the two women, both of whom looked equally stunned and wary. "You two know each other?" Ethan asked, his voice slicing through the silence. Claire crossed her arms, her expression hardening. "We grew up together," she said tersely. "Samantha and I were friends, a long time ago." Samantha let out a dry laugh. "Friends, that's one way to put it. Let's not forget how you disappeared when things got tough, Claire." Claire's jaw tightened, her usual composed demeanor cracking. "You don't know what I went through. I had to look out for myself. And now you're here? What are you really doing, Samantha?" Ethan raised a hand, cutting off the brewing argument. "Enough. I don't have time for whatever history you two have. Samantha, why are you really here?" Samantha turned her focus back to Ethan. "To help you. But if you want the truth, Claire and I used to be close. We grew up in the same foster system. We went our separate ways, but clearly we've ended up in the same place again." Ethan's mind reeled. Two people from the same background, now at the center of his company's potential downfall. Coincidence, or something more deliberate? "Is there something I need to know here?" Ethan asked, his voice sharp. Claire spoke first. "I had no idea she'd show up here. Whatever she's involved in, it's got nothing to do with me." Samantha shot her a glare. I'm here because Victor is dangerous, and if you think you can trust everyone around you, Ethan, you're wrong. The tension hung in the air even after Claire left the room. Samantha took a seat, her eyes softening slightly. I didn't come here to cause trouble, she said, but I'd be lying if I said I trusted her. Claire's been with me for years, Ethan replied. If she's hiding something, I'll find out, but right now I need to focus on Victor. You said we need access to his private correspondence. Do you know how I can get it? Samantha hesitated. Victor's meticulous, but he's arrogant too. He probably thinks no one can outsmart him. If you can access his personal email or his private laptop, you'll find what you need. But it won't be easy. Ethan nodded, already formulating a plan. I'll handle it. But Samantha, if there's more you're not telling me about Claire or Victor, now's the time. She shook her head. I've told you everything I know. The rest is up to you. Ethan spent the next few hours in a whirlwind of planning. If Samantha was right, Victor's private correspondence would hold the key to exposing his betrayal. But accessing it without raising suspicion required precision and subtlety. Victor called later that afternoon, his tone as polished as ever. Ethan, everything set for tomorrow's signing ceremony? Almost, Ethan replied, forcing a note of casual confidence into his voice. I want to go over the final details tonight to make sure we're airtight. Victor chuckled. Always the perfectionist, that's why we make a great team. The words stung now, but Ethan pushed the emotion aside. I'll be here late. If you want to swing by, we can review everything together. Sounds good, Victor said. I'll bring a bottle of that whiskey you like. Let's celebrate early. Looking forward to it, Ethan lied before hanging up. As evening approached, Ethan enlisted the help of his tech team under the guise of a routine security audit. They provided him with a discreet way to monitor Victor's laptop remotely once he accessed it. When Victor arrived, his usual charm in full force, Ethan kept the conversation light, pretending to review documents while subtly watching his every move. Let me pull up the latest projections, Victor said, powering on his sleek laptop. Ethan's heart raced as Victor typed in his password. He glanced at the keyboard, mentally noting the sequence of keys. Minutes later, while Victor was engrossed in a phone call, Ethan excused himself under the pretense of grabbing more files. In reality, he returned to his own desk and activated the monitoring software, which quickly established a connection to Victor's laptop. After Victor left for the night, Ethan sat alone in his office, combing through the trove of emails, spreadsheets, and messages that appeared on his screen. The deeper he dug, the more damning the evidence became. Victor had been funneling money into multiple shell companies, all linked to a sprawling network of offshore accounts. But there was something else, a series of emails between Victor and someone named CR, discussing ways to mitigate Ethan's interference. The initials sent a chill down his spine. CR, could that be Claire? Ethan leaned back in his chair, the weight of the discovery pressing down on him. Samantha's warning had been right, but the betrayal ran deeper than he'd imagined. He needed to confront Victor, but now another question loomed. Was Claire involved? And if so, what role was she playing in this tangled web? As the clock struck midnight, Ethan realized the game wasn't just about saving his company anymore. It was about figuring out who he could trust and who was waiting to stab him in the back. The stakes had never been higher and the answers were closer than ever. But could he handle the truth when it finally came to light? Ethan stood in the glass-walled boardroom the next morning, his fingers lightly drumming the edge of the mahogany table. Outside, the city bustled as usual, but inside, tension crackled in the air. The evidence he'd uncovered the night before played on a loop in his mind. Victor's betrayal was undeniable, but the looming possibility of Claire's involvement complicated everything. When Victor walked in, he was the picture of confidence, his tailored suit and easy smile projecting the air of a man in complete control. He carried a folder tucked under one arm and a bottle of whiskey in the other. Ethan, you look tense, Victor said, setting the bottle on the table. Relax. Today's a big day. By the end of it, we'll be the most talked about duo in the industry. Ethan forced a smile, the mask of composure he'd perfected over years of boardroom battles. You're right. Let's talk through the final details before we sign. Victor's brow furrowed slightly, but he sat down across from Ethan, spreading out the documents. I thought everything was already settled. It is, Ethan said smoothly, sliding a folder toward Victor. But there's one last thing I need clarity on. Victor opened the folder, his expression unchanging as he scanned the pages. The documents were carefully selected, a mix of financial transfers, emails, and connections to shell companies. Ethan watched closely, looking for any crack in Victor's facade. Victor chuckled, closing the folder. Where'd you get these? You tell me, Ethan said, his tone colder now. Because these look a lot like evidence of fraud. Evidence that points directly to you. Victor leaned back, his smirk unwavering. Ethan, come on. Do you know how many layers of legal protection we have in place? None of this would hold up in court. You're wasting your time. Ethan's fist clenched beneath the table, but he kept his voice steady. You've been skimming money from the company and funneling it into offshore accounts. I've traced every transaction back to you. This isn't just fraud. It's a calculated betrayal. Victor's smirk faded, replaced by a steely glare. Careful, Ethan. Throwing around accusations like that without proof could cost you more than you realize. Proof? Ethan countered, his voice rising slightly. You mean the emails discussing how to mitigate my interference? The shell companies tied to your name? The offshore accounts draining company assets? I have all the proof I need. For the first time, Victor looked unsettled. His gaze flickered toward the door, as though he was weighing his options for escape. You've been my partner for years, Ethan continued, his voice quieter now, but no less intense. I trusted you. I believed in our vision for this company, and you turned it into your personal cash cow. Victor's expression hardened. It's not like you think, Ethan. I did this for us, for the company. You're too naive, too idealistic to see the big picture. Do you really think we'd survive in this market without a few creative solutions? Ethan stared at him, disgust tightening his chest. This isn't about survival. This is about greed. You didn't just betray me. You betrayed every employee who works for this company. You betrayed everything we built together. Before Victor could respond, the door opened and Claire stepped inside. She paused, taking in the tension between the two men. Am I interrupting? Not at all, Ethan said, his gaze fixed on Victor. In fact, you're just in time. Victor's eyes flicked toward Claire, a glimmer of something unreadable passing between them. It was enough to confirm Ethan's growing suspicion. Claire, Ethan said, his tone sharper now, how long have you known about Victor's scheme? Claire's face paled. What are you talking about? Don't play dumb, Ethan snapped, standing up. I found the emails. Ciara isn't just some random alias, it's you. You've been working with Victor this whole time, haven't you? Claire's eyes darted between Ethan and Victor, her lips parting as if to deny it, but no words came. Victor spoke first. Don't drag her into this, Ethan. She was just doing her job. Her job? Ethan repeated, his voice incredulous. Her job was to help you siphon millions from this company? Claire finally found her voice. It's not what you think, she said, her voice trembling. Victor pressured me into it. He said if I didn't help him, he'd destroy my career. Ethan's jaw tightened. He wanted to believe her. Claire had been a loyal and efficient assistant for years, but the weight of her betrayal cut deep. You could have come to me, Ethan said, his voice quieter now. Why didn't you? Claire's eyes filled with tears. I was scared. He's powerful, Ethan. You don't know what he's capable of. Victor scoffed. Oh, give it a rest, Claire. We both know you weren't exactly reluctant. Ethan's head snapped toward Victor. You're done here, he said coldly. I've already contacted the board. They're reviewing the evidence as we speak. By the end of the day, your name will be tied to a criminal investigation, and your shares will be frozen. Victor stood, his posture defiant. You think you've won? This is just business, Ethan. You'll see soon enough that your so-called morality has no place in this world. As Victor stormed out, Ethan turned back to Claire, who was still standing by the door, visibly shaken. Why did you really do it, Claire? Ethan asked, his voice softer now. Claire wiped her eyes, her voice barely above a whisper. I thought I could handle it, that I could fix it before it went too far. But I was wrong. Ethan sighed, running a hand through his hair. You're going to have to answer for your part in this, but if you're willing to cooperate, I'll make sure you're treated fairly. Claire nodded, her expression a mix of relief and shame. As Ethan sat back down, the weight of the confrontation settled over him. He had taken the first step toward untangling the mess Victor had created, but the cost of betrayal, from both Victor and Claire, was something he would carry for a long time. He reached for his phone and called Samantha. It's done, he said simply. Victor knows I'm on to him. And Claire? Samantha asked. She's complicated, Ethan admitted, but I think she's willing to help. Good, Samantha said, because if Victor's as desperate as I think he is, things are about to get even more dangerous. Ethan leaned back in his chair, staring out at the city skyline. The battle was far from over, but for the first time in days, he felt like he had the upper hand. But Samantha's words lingered in his mind. Things are about to get even more dangerous. Whatever lay ahead, Ethan knew this was just the beginning. The fallout from Ethan's confrontation with Victor spread quickly through the company. The board was in a frenzy. Financial analysts were scrambling to trace the stolen funds, and the media had caught wind of internal turbulence at Callaway Enterprises. Ethan stayed composed, but beneath his calm exterior, he was bracing for the next storm. That storm arrived sooner than expected. It began with a single unexpected email from Victor's personal account, an account Ethan had gained access to through the monitoring software. The email was brief but chilling. You've made your move, Ethan. Now watch me make mine. Ethan stared at the screen, his mind racing. What did Victor mean? Had he planned a counterattack? He didn't have to wait long to find out. By midday, rumors began swirling that Victor was meeting with a rival company, Orion Tech, to sell confidential Callaway Enterprises data. If true, it could destroy Callaway's competitive edge and dismantle years of hard work. As Ethan worked tirelessly to contain the damage, Claire entered his office. She looked exhausted, her face pale and drawn. Ethan, there's something else you need to know, she said, her voice barely audible. Ethan glanced up, his patience wearing thin. What now, Claire? She placed a photograph on his desk. It was a grainy but unmistakable image of Samantha sitting with Victor at a cafe. She's not who she says she is, Claire said quietly. Samantha used to work with Victor. She's not here to help you, Ethan. She's here to protect him. Ethan's stomach twisted as he stared at the photo. You're saying she's been playing me this whole time? Claire nodded. I'm not excusing what I did, but I've known Samantha long enough to know she has her own agenda. You need to be careful. Ethan wrestled with the revelation, unsure what to believe. Samantha had risked a lot to warn him about Victor, but the photo was damning. Was she playing both sides? And if so, why? That evening, Ethan called Samantha and asked her to meet him at a quiet restaurant far from the city center. When she arrived, her face was calm but guarded. You sounded urgent, Samantha said as she slid into the booth across from him. Ethan didn't waste time. He placed the photograph on the table between them. Explain this. Samantha's expression didn't change, but there was a flicker of something in her eyes. Guilt, perhaps. I used to work with Victor, she admitted, but not in the way you think. I was part of his team during one of his earlier schemes. When I realized what he was doing, I left. But leaving wasn't easy. He threatened me, tried to ruin my life. That's why I've been watching him ever since. Ethan leaned back, his arms crossed. And you just happened to show up at the diner when I was there? It wasn't a coincidence, Samantha said. When I heard about your merger with Zenith, I knew Victor was involved. I wanted to warn you before it was too late. Her explanation sounded plausible, but Ethan couldn't shake the doubt gnawing at him. If you've been watching Victor for years, why haven't you reported him? Samantha's gaze hardened. Because people like Victor don't go down easily. He's got connections. Powerful ones. I tried once before, and it nearly ruined me. Helping you was my way of making things right. Ethan studied her face, searching for any sign of deception. I want to believe you, Samantha. But if I find out you're lying... I'm not, Samantha said firmly. If you don't trust me, fine. But trust the evidence I've given you. It's the only way you're going to stop him. Ethan returned to his office late that night, the weight of Samantha's words pressing heavily on him. He wanted to trust her, but the photograph and Claire's warning made it impossible to ignore the possibility that she was manipulating him. As he settled at his desk, his phone buzzed. It was a text from Samantha. Victor's next move is happening tomorrow. He's meeting someone at Orion Tech HQ. You need to act fast. The message reignited Ethan's suspicions. Why would Samantha know Victor's plans unless she was still in contact with him? Was she truly trying to help, or was she setting him up? Ethan decided to take matters into his own hands. The next morning, he instructed his security team to follow Victor while he focused on gathering additional evidence. Hours later, his head of security, Michael, called with an update. Sir, we followed Victor to a private airstrip, Michael reported. He boarded a jet bound for the Cayman Islands. If I had to guess, he's moving to secure his offshore assets. Ethan cursed under his breath. If Victor disappeared, it would make recovering the stolen funds nearly impossible. But then Michael added, There's one more thing. Someone was with him. A woman. She kept her face hidden, but we think it was Samantha. Ethan's heart sank. The betrayal felt like a knife twisting in his chest. Had Samantha been feeding him just enough truth to gain his trust while secretly helping Victor escape? He didn't have time to dwell on the thought. A notification on his laptop caught his attention, an email from an anonymous sender. It contained an attachment labeled Final Piece of the Puzzle. Ethan opened the file, his breath catching as he scanned its contents. It was a detailed timeline of Victor's schemes, including the names of his accomplices. At the very bottom of the list was a name Ethan didn't expect, Claire. But the email wasn't what it seemed. As Ethan read further, he realized the timeline was fabricated, a trap designed to make Claire the scapegoat while Victor and Samantha disappeared with the money. Ethan's blood boiled. He had been manipulated from all sides, but now he had the full picture. Samantha and Victor weren't just working together. They had orchestrated the entire game, using Claire as their decoy. Ethan acted swiftly. He alerted the authorities, providing them with the real evidence he had collected, and instructed his team to freeze every account tied to Victor. But there was one more move he needed to make. He called Claire into his office, her face a mixture of apprehension and exhaustion. I know the truth, Ethan said. Victor and Samantha tried to frame you. They wanted me to believe you were part of their scheme. Claire's eyes widened in shock. But you don't believe them, do you? No, Ethan said firmly. But we need to move fast. Victor's running, and if we don't stop him, everything we've worked for will be gone. Claire nodded, determination replacing her fear. What do you need me to do? Ethan leaned forward, his voice steady. We're going to turn the tables, and this time, they won't see it coming. As Ethan and Claire prepared their counterstrike, he couldn't shake the bitter sting of betrayal. Samantha had played him masterfully, but she had underestimated his resolve. The final act was about to begin, and Ethan was determined to end it on his terms. Ethan Calloway stood in the conference room overlooking the city skyline, the weight of the past week pressing heavily on his shoulders. The storm Victor had unleashed was finally beginning to settle, but the scars it left behind were deep. Calloway Enterprises had survived the betrayal, but at great cost, not just financial, but emotional. Ethan's trust, once so easily given to those around him, was now guarded like a fortress. The plan to corner Victor and Samantha had worked, though not without complications. After hours of strategizing, Ethan and Claire had devised a way to trap them. By using the fabricated timeline Samantha and Victor had planted, they had lured them into thinking their scheme had succeeded. But Claire, who had proven her loyalty through her tenacity, had turned the tables at the last moment. 2 days earlier, Claire had accompanied Ethan to a private meeting with the authorities. Armed with the real evidence Ethan had collected, offshore account details, email chains, and financial records, they had frozen Victor's assets and flagged Samantha's movements. Samantha and Victor, thinking they had successfully framed Claire, had arrived at the airstrip prepared to leave the country. What they hadn't counted on was Ethan's security team and federal agents waiting for them. The moment Victor stepped off the jet, he was placed in handcuffs. Samantha had tried to run, but Ethan himself had confronted her. "You could have been honest with me," Ethan said, his voice steady but filled with disappointment. "I might have helped you." Samantha's eyes, filled with a mixture of regret and defiance, met his. "You don't understand, Ethan. People like Victor don't let you walk away clean. I did what I had to do to survive." "Surviving doesn't excuse betrayal," Ethan replied. Samantha had been taken into custody alongside Victor, but her words lingered in Ethan's mind long after she was gone. Now, standing in the conference room, Ethan reflected on the chaos they had left behind. Victor's arrest had made headlines, and Calloway Enterprises was praised for its swift response to the scandal. Investors who had initially panicked were now rallying behind Ethan, impressed by his resilience. But the victory felt hollow. Claire entered the room, a stack of folders in her hands. She had been a constant presence over the past few days, working tirelessly to help Ethan stabilize the company. Despite her earlier mistakes, she had proven her loyalty in the end, and Ethan was beginning to see her in a new light. "Here's the latest report on the merger," Claire said, placing the folders on the table. "The board approved your revisions this morning. It's clean now. No more surprises." Ethan nodded, glancing at the folders but not opening them. "Thank you, Claire. For everything." She hesitated, then sat across from him. "I know I don't deserve your gratitude, not after what I kept from you." "You made mistakes," Ethan said, meeting her gaze, "but you owned up to them and you helped me when it mattered most. That's more than I can say for some people." Claire offered a small smile. "If there's one thing I've learned from all this, it's that loyalty isn't about never making mistakes. It's about standing by someone when things fall apart." Ethan nodded, her words resonating deeply. "We've been through the worst of it. Now it's time to rebuild." Over the next few weeks, Ethan threw himself into his work, repairing the damage Victor and Samantha had caused. The merger with Zenith Technologies, once a ticking time bomb, was renegotiated under new terms that benefited Calloway Enterprises without the risk of exploitation. The board of directors, impressed by Ethan's leadership during the crisis, reaffirmed their support for him. But Ethan knew the company's recovery wasn't just about numbers. It was about restoring trust. To that end, he held a company-wide meeting, addressing his employees directly for the first time since the scandal broke. Standing on the stage of the packed auditorium, he spoke from the heart. "We faced betrayal from within, and it nearly tore us apart," Ethan began, his voice steady. "But we survived because of the people in this room, the people who believed in what we stand for. Calloway Enterprises isn't just a company, it's a family, and no matter how hard things get, families stick together." The applause that followed was thunderous, but Ethan knew the real work was only just beginning. One evening, after the dust had finally started to settle, Ethan found himself at the Velvet Spoon, the diner where the entire ordeal had begun. It felt strange being there without the tension of Victor's schemes hanging over him. As he sipped his coffee, Claire walked in, surprising him. "I figured I'd find you here," she said, sliding into the booth across from him. "I needed some perspective," Ethan admitted. "This place reminds me how quickly everything can change." Claire smiled. "Change isn't always bad, Ethan. Sometimes it's what you need to move forward." He nodded, the weight of her words settling over him. "You've been a big part of that change, Claire. I don't say this often, but I couldn't have done it without you." Claire's cheeks flushed slightly, but her smile didn't waver. "Well, someone has to keep you out of trouble." They both laughed, the first genuine moment of levity they'd shared in weeks. As Ethan walked back to his car that night, he realized that while he had lost a great deal in the past month, he had also gained something invaluable, a deeper understanding of who he could trust and what truly mattered. Victor and Samantha's betrayal had taught him harsh lessons, but they had also cleared the way for a new chapter, not just for Callaway Enterprises, but for Ethan himself. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time in a long time, Ethan felt ready to face it. Sometimes betrayal wasn't the end of the story. Sometimes it was the beginning of something better.